us. I really appreciate you joining us. I'm Renee Grolowitz, the League of Women Voters Appleton Vice President of Programs, and you can see that today we're talking about affordable housing in our area, and we are really blessed to have Christy Clover with us, and we'll introduce her a little later. Um, so I just want to let you know, please keep your mics muted when you're not speaking, and we will indeed have breakout sessions this time. We'll have 3 groups, and this time each group will have a different question. And when we come back to the larger group, it'll be really pretty cool to hear the report back. We are monitoring the chat room, so if you have questions, you can please post them in the chat room, and if there's time, we'll address those. And Christy has already blessed us and said that she'll hang around late if we don't get to all of the questions on time. So at this time, let me introduce to you Jean Roberts, our president of League of Women Voters Appleton.
Thank you, Renee, and welcome everyone. And I want to start by acknowledging that Appleton is located on the traditional homeland of the Menominee Nation. In addition to the Menominee Nation, there are 10 other federally recognized Native American sovereign nations in Wisconsin, as well as the brother town that is not yet recognized. By acknowledging that we are meeting on the traditional land of these sovereign nations, we honor with gratitude the land itself and the people who have stewarded it throughout the generations. So again, thank you for joining us. For those who don't know, the League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan organization, meaning that we do not endorse nor support candidates. All advocacy is done using research-based positions. Our current study committee is finishing their 2-year program on climate change preparedness and resiliency, and they have developed several videos regarding the results of their research. Those videos are on our website and on our YouTube page, along with videos of all our other programs. In December, we will be hosting Matthew Rothschild for what would normally be our holiday brunch, and he will be speaking about Fair Maps redistricting. Prior to that, we will be holding an online auction that Sue Hoffensberger and Cindy Falona have worked hard to put together. We are still accepting auction items, and they will begin to be posted by the end of November. In January, we will be holding our first virtual Lively Issues, which is the event at which League of Women Voters members and non-members discuss issues of importance to decide what, if any, issues we will be studying for next year. It is at that meeting that we will also discuss topics for programming for next year. So keep your eyes open for information regarding all of these. If you are not a member and are interested in any of the programs, leave your name in the chat and we will contact you. For anyone who is not available to attend Saturday's issues briefing that was put on by the League of Women Voters of Wisconsin, the videos will soon be available on their website. The focus Saturday was on the effects of COVID-19 on our educational systems, on the healthcare of communities of color, and on the economy of women and communities of color. Also, just a reminder that membership fees will be coming due soon. We will continue with our tiered member system, which we have found to be very successful. We are continuing to look for volunteers, especially to work with our virtual programs and other online issues. We also need a couple of people to volunteer to be on the budget committee, which will require 2 to 3 hours for one day in February. As you renew your memberships, please let us know the ways in which you would like to participate in the League. There's always room for people who want to participate with us. Thank you, everybody, and now back to Renee.
All right, thank you, Jean. It's my pleasure to introduce Christy Clover. Christy is the Almost Home Program Manager for Habitat for Humanity for the past 8 years. In her job, she directly works with minorities and marginalized people in the community to secure safe and affordable housing. She formerly worked with the Fair Housing Center of Northeast Wisconsin, so has a great history of working with people in this field of housing discrimination as well. Christy?
Well, hello, everybody. Can you hear? I hope you can hear me. I am excited to talk to you tonight. Most of my presentation will be firsthand examples of people that I work with, so you can learn what's happening to people in our own community and hopefully come up with some ideas to help. I want to let you know ahead that I broke the presentation down into a few areas that affect our marginalized population. And I will start with housing discrimination, pointing out a few of the major protected classes impacted in our community. And then I will move into a brief overview of the housing stock in our community, since I received a pre-question from someone in the group wondering about the downtown housing developments. I will also cover waitlist numbers and how that looks at the housing authorities. And then we'll stop for a quick breakout discussion around discrimination. Then I'll go on to cover a little bit about non-discriminatory items that affect our marginalized population, touching on characteristics of the population that we serve, and end with a tidbit about what organizations are doing in this community to help. Throughout my talk, I will be inserting ideas of where you can help in the community. So if you have a pencil and paper ready, you might want to jot those down. And I will email contacts for different places that you can volunteer after this, so they can share that widely. And also, if we stick to our schedule during the breakout, I will end with time for Q&A. So slide 2, thank you. I've listed the protected classes, which means in any part, you cannot treat people differently or unfairly based on any of these characteristics when it comes to housing. The ones in red receive the most complaints. And during the pandemic, there has been a drastic increase in discrimination based on race, color, and national origin and ancestry. Other high complaint rates include familial status, and that means the presence of children in the home, and disability, but I do not have enough time to go in depth on those two tonight. Racial discrimination has increased during the pandemic due to two main reasons. Since COVID-19 started in China and people don't take the time to educate themselves about the difference between China and other Asian populations, there has been increased discrimination, not only to Chinese people across the country, but also to people from Asia in general, including our local Hmong population. Now, since I work for Habitat, most of my examples are from there. But when I talked to the Fair Housing Council in Milwaukee, they do discrimination work up here as well. They said the same things are happening to people all over our community. One direct example of discrimination related to COVID-19 is about a Hmong family that Habitat is building a home for right now. While the home is being built, the family still lives in an apartment. And during COVID-19, the family started getting hate letters taped to their apartment door. And then another apartment tenant egged the family's car numerous times. And people would pound on the Hmong family's door until someone would answer. And then they would ask, "Why are you still here? Why aren't you dead?" One person asked why they brought coronavirus here. The family went to the landlord for help, and the landlord did not stop this activity from happening when the tenant complained. So the tenant actually called, they ended up turning to Habitat for help because they trusted us. And then we worked with the Fair Housing Council, and the family has agreed to file an official complaint with the Fair Housing Council and has worked with the police department to resolve the situation. But I wanted to point out that there is nothing that can take away the pain and suffering that that family is going through because of what has happened to them. And then secondly, with the death of George Floyd, the climate of our country, with President Trump as the country's leader, and racial tensions have caused people to increase discrimination to the African American population. People that would normally keep their racist comments to themselves at the dinner table are feeling empowered to actively discriminate against people now, and then sometimes even commit hate crimes. And we're seeing this in Appleton, and I wanted to give an example, and you can change the slide if you'd like to. We had an odd case come across my desk about a month ago that I don't even know how to categorize, but I wanted to share it because it gives a good example of the racial climate in the Fox cities. One of my client's children had been supposedly vandalizing a neighbor's home, and so the apartment management from out of town called my client and wanted to set up a meeting to address it. And so my client took ownership and said if her son had vandalized something, that she of course would like to know about it so she could punish him and make it right. Well, the apartment management drove all the way up to Appleton from Fond du Lac. And long story short, the boy had written Black Lives Matter on the neighbor's driveway in chalk. The reason he did this was because he is African American, and the neighbor always yells out to him and the other neighbor boys, calling them the N word and other racial comments. That was this 9-year-old's way of standing up for himself. And instead, management made him apologize to the neighbor for writing that, and they stood over him while he had to scrub the chalk off of the driveway. The management told him he was a vandal and made him feel terrible. Instead of addressing both his actions and the racism, they only addressed the boy's actions. Now, this might be in the gray area technically with the whole chalk situation not being illegal, but it is definitely not okay for a child to have to live in a place where he is being called the N-word. The client was also bothered because she had been waiting for her door to get fixed for over a year, with drafts coming in during the winter, raising her utility bills through the roof. And the landlord won't address it at all. But the very next day, management drives right up here to Appleton when a white person makes a complaint of vandalism by a black boy. While management was there, she asked them if they could fix the door, and they ignored her question. So I go working with her, getting things situated, and about 2 months later, I get a new client. And sure enough, she was referred by this client that I was talking about. She is also African American, and her kids are having the same sort of discrimination issues in the apartment complex. They live in the same complex as this person. The sad thing is, the reason that both of these families live in this particular apartment complex is because that is one of the only places that takes the Section 8 voucher that they both have from the Appleton Housing Authority. So you can see the complexity of how this particular marginalized population is being affected by the very systems that are meant to make their lives good, such as the Section 8 voucher that makes their home affordable. Now, before I move on, I want to let you know I did arrange to rent a home for this client, so she will be moving out of the rental that is causing her so much pain. Now, I want to tell you a little bit about an organization where I used to work for them, and they do anti-discrimination work, and they've been doing it since 1977. The Metropolitan Milwaukee Fair Housing Council does housing discrimination work throughout the state of Wisconsin, and this includes undercover investigations, training, answering questions that landlords have, and helping people seek legal remedy for discrimination. Now, they recently added a focus on fighting hate in our communities. And quoting them, they say, "There is a place for everyone in anti-racism work. No one person or organization can do it all, but together our collective power is transformative." The Fair Housing Council has some suggestions to help combat racism in our community. A few of these include to volunteer time on projects that meet immediate community needs. So for an example, you could volunteer at the Fair Housing Council or volunteer to help more landlords convince them to take the Section 8 voucher so that low-income individuals have more choice of where to live and hopefully can find housing where they won't be discriminated against. Another thing they suggest is volunteering time with projects that dismantle entrenched systemic inequality. I would suggest you could volunteer for Habitat for Humanity. People of color have less opportunity for home ownership, and the same goes for low-income people. And volunteering directly impacting the success of families becoming homeowners that are usually discriminated against and often have a history of generational poverty is a great way to do that. But if you don't want to do that, consider being involved with job training programs, mentoring programs, and basic need programs. There's a ton in our community, and we're very lucky. You can also prioritize your financial gifts to organizations and projects that include efforts to expand racial equality and equity. Speak out for justice, talk with your circles of friends, communicate with elected officials, and write letters to the editorial pages of your newspapers. And I think I heard someone in the early chat say something about writing letters to the newspapers. So this would be another great way. Keep that up. All right, so next slide. Oh, we're already on it. For downtown housing, this 2 questions came in ahead from one of you, so I'm just going to read those questions. The question is, please help us understand if and why new housing in downtown Appleton area is affordable housing. And then the second part of that question is this new housing geared for singles, couples, and or families? And what size families? So on a quick search, the largest units are 3 bedrooms. So the largest family could be a family of 6. I reached out to Karen Harkness from Community Development at the City of Appleton, And she said that the city is following the community vision from their comprehensive plan. She wanted me to mention that the league was an awesome partner and participant in the process of updating the comp plan, and she wanted me to thank all of you. And here's the stuff that she shared with me. Related to the comp plan, 52% of respondents to the citywide survey said they wanted to live downtown. Karen did say that we need to have a mixture of all income levels and a variety of residential options downtown. And you can see on the slide that the newest construction is a mix of market rate, and then Crescent Lofts is a WIDA tax credit project. And I listed how many units there are. Crescent Lofts is a 2 and 3 bedrooms, in case I think someone asked that. Adding any type of housing in the community is good. In fact, the comp plan addressed the housing need for downtown perfectly, in my opinion, accounting for Lawrence students, young professionals, and other downtown demands. But you won't see your lowest income families living downtown because the housing wasn't designed for them. The tax credit properties were designed for lowish income people, meaning those on the high end of low income. So let me tell you why. You can see that 4 of the new apartment complexes downtown are market rate. If you're like me, you might wonder, well, what is market rate? How much is that? Well, a 2-bedroom, 2-bath at Gabriel Lofts is $1,895 a month. That is awesome and great for a couple making $40,000 per year each. I mean, look at the pictures there on the right. It's a beautiful apartment. But for a single parent household to afford this apartment, they would need to make $75,800 per year, which equates to $36 per hour. And most of the single parents that I work with make maybe 12 to 17 per hour. So if we just kind of go towards the middle of that at $15 an hour, I did the math and figured out that they would be paying 76% of their income for this apartment. Paying too much for housing leads to many more problems for the family, and often things start to crumble apart piece by piece. Now, Crescent Lofts, which is the 2 and 3 bedroom apartments, is the WIDA Historic Tax Credit Project, with 58 of the 69 planned apartments reserved for low to moderate income levels. Now, low to moderate income housing is defined as a family of 4 making less than $45,000-ish a year. So less than $21.72 per hour for a single adult, or if there's 2 adults working about $10 to $11 an hour for each adult. Now, the total of these new housing units that are going on right now are 182 units. And based on those numbers, 32% of the units recently added to downtown are affordable in terms of WIDA tax credit affordable. So in context that I told you what affordable means. The city wanted to point out that other WIDA tax credit projects occurred before the uptick of residential housing in the central business district. And if I remember, most of these that I'm talking about here are within the last 5 years. You might have heard of these. There's Union Square, Woolen Mills, Riverwalk Place, and the Landings. And I looked on their website, and just so you can kind of see what the rates are for these affordable, quote, quote, affordable units, 1,000 to 1,500, somewhere in there. Those developments, though, paired with the Crescent Lofts one, are more than 200 apartments for people who are low to moderate income residents, and those are either on the river or downtown. I want to take a minute, though, to point out that all of these affordable housing apartments have a wait list. So without looking at any sort of statistical evidence, this in itself shows there is a need for more affordable housing. Also, you might wonder, how does this tax credit program benefit the residents of that property? Since the tenant's income has to be below the maximum income limit, the rent amount charged is indeed lower than that of comparable market rate apartments. So I thought I would be practical, and I looked up apartment or amounts to show you that yes, indeed, the rents are a lot less than the market rate that I just talked to you about on the previous page. You can get a 3-bedroom apartment for somewhere around $1,100 at a tax credit property, where the market rate apartment downtown, you can only get a 2-bedroom apartment for $1,800. When I see these numbers, I know that neither are affordable for the families that I work with. So I thought, well, let's see what a single parent would need to make to afford a 3-bedroom apartment at the tax credit property, which is the $1,100. They would need to make $21 per hour or employment income paired with child support So it is possible for those single parents on the upper end of low income to afford tax credit properties. And I presume that's probably who's living in them. It's great that these cost less than the market rate ones, because that does save the family some money, but they are still not affordable for many of the lower wage job earners. So to answer the pre-question, the housing wasn't designed for the lowest income families. That is not necessarily a bad thing though, since most of the families I work with don't care if they live downtown or not. They just want to live anywhere that is safe and affordable. And if anything, they would like to live by a particular elementary school. I personally think the downtown housing is fine as long as the city addresses affordable housing for the lowest income population elsewhere in Appleton. Now, one random problem I just felt like I would share with you is I come across it almost daily. It's the complete lack of 4-bedroom rentals in the Fox cities. We see many families with 7 to 10 people in their household that do not fit into a 3-bedroom apartment. And Habitat is great, but we can only build 15 to 17 homes per year. So we alone cannot meet that demand. And the problem has come up at the Fox Cities Housing Coalition meetings before, but honestly, we don't have a solution. 4 bedrooms are likely not cost effective to build, and they take up more space. So there are many reasons why this probably occurs, but it is definitely a huge issue in this community. I cannot tell you how many times I get an application for Habitat where it is a family of 7 living in a 2-bedroom apartment, time and time again. So I think the big question that we probably can't answer today is, where are these lower income families supposed to live? Now, many people, I have to take a drink, just 1 second here. Many people think getting housing from a housing authority is a great idea, which it is. The Appleton Housing Authority helps 900 families per month with a mix of housing authority owned rentals and Section 8 vouchers. They have a fixed number of Section 8 vouchers, 547, and then 55 extra Section 8 vouchers that are for veterans only. And I think you know how vouchers work, but in case you don't, essentially the housing authority pays a portion of your rent to the landlord to keep the tenant's expense at approximately 30% of their income. There are so many people wanting those vouchers. Over 2,200 families are on the wait list, which actually ended up closing September 1st of this year because the wait list was so long. It takes those families anywhere from 2 to 4 years long for their names to come up on the list. This is hard for families since they have nowhere else to turn for affordable housing while they wait. In addition, Outagamie County Housing Authority has a total of 585 families on their waiting list. I called ahead and talked to Kendra Krisher, the leasing manager for Outagamie County, and she says, quote, "Unfortunately, I would say income, background, and credit are what hinders most of the people searching for housing. The rental market is not exactly affordable for single parent families, and the housing authority has quite a few families that the single parent doesn't work, or they continually switch jobs, which hinders stability. Kendra wishes she could see more life skills offered in the community. She would like to see more accountability with housing programs, somehow to help people see that earning an income is a good thing, so they strive to get off of assistance. Appleton Housing Authority now does have a family self-sufficiency program, but it is voluntary, so the people who enroll have to take a leap of faith to go through all of the hoops of improving their lives and becoming self-sufficient. Part of this process might be temporarily losing much needed benefits such as food share and medical as their income climbs, but not high enough to support themselves with their paycheck alone. Instead of government benefits having a gradual decrease in benefits, we have the benefits cliff, where all the medical and food get cut off when you hit a certain income level. Same goes for free and reduced lunch at school. So once you lose your free and reduced lunch, you lose access to the free government phone, the reduced cost internet, and you no longer qualify for free back to school supplies, and your sports and activity fees are no longer waived. So that's a lot of money if you start adding that up. The point is there is a point where you actually have less money to pay your bills when you hit a certain income limit, because you are now responsible for the health insurance premium, the grocery bills, and the benefits and other things. Both of the housing authorities in our community do a magnificent job, but they too feel the need for more affordable housing. For every person they can say yes to, they have hundreds that they have to turn away. All right, so now you just listened to me for a ton of time. So I'm going to read the breakout questions. And then when you get into your group, look in the chat. Oh, wait, I forgot how that works. Does someone else want to talk? Oop.
Absolutely. So what'll happen is your groups are random. We're going to pop you into a group. And when you get in the group, please unmute your mic. And group 1, I believe, is Jean Roberts, the lead there. Group 2, the lead will be Christy. And group 3, you'll work with me on the question there. So group 1, what ideas do you have to make it easier for low-income housing, low-income African-American families to live in discrimination-free housing? Group 2, do we need more landlords to take Section 8 vouchers so there is more choice of affordable housing options, and how could you be involved in this? Group 3, families don't always feel comfortable making discrimination complaints to the Fair Housing Office because it is too stressful on them, or they are afraid that it will backfire and they won't have any place to live. How can we change the climate in our community for this population? I have to stop sharing. And
you'll have 2 minutes to report back. So make sure that somebody at the end can do a summary for 2 minutes. And that's about it.
Yeah. Ready when you are, Barb. Pray for us. I can see everybody. Yay. Hi. Obviously, group 3 knows I never made it. Sorry about that. Little computer glitch here. Yeah. So, Christy, do you want to moderate this discussion?
Sure. Okay. Well, group 1, why don't you speak about what you came across? Oh, and before you speak, I just want to say, I could have picked like any population, but since my examples were about the African-American women I was talking about, that's why I just put those questions in there, because I thought, hey, let's just pick any part of a problem that we can kind of put our heads around and our minds to work. So go ahead, group 1.
All right, a couple of things that this group came up with: that we need to change the pattern of segregation by income and race. We need individual action, people willing to welcome new neighbors into the neighborhoods. Somebody mentioned the book of Evicted, that's a really good book to reference. And somebody mentioned the concerns about with COVID, there's going to be more people looking at being evicted, especially because the federal government hasn't worked to get a relief package out. And this person also mentioned the idea of the city and county working together with landlords. And then she was cut off because we had to come up to the larger group.
All right.
So those are the ideas.
All right. So now group 2, report back and tell them what your question was.
Okay, I guess I was nominated for that. To take, how can we get landlords to take more Section 8 vouchers? And one thing that really popped out was that we don't know why, and maybe they don't understand how the vouchers work, or we should understand why they're not taking the vouchers. So really a lot more open communication with landlords. And then once we know why they don't accept it, educating them. And especially if we know anybody who has had a personal experience, which I have actually, and maybe that's why I'm supposed to be talking. I actually was a landlord, and for a long time, not for a long time, but for a little while, we were really hesitant to take vouchers. We just didn't quite know if we'd have to fill out a lot of applications or if it was a lot more paperwork. And then we decided to do it, and it was so easy, and the money just was right there. It was actually a lot easier than worrying about, is this tenant going to be able to make their payment? So wow. I guess maybe letting landlords understand how it works. And then someone suggested using the school's communication systems to get the information out. I understand from Christy, there is a list of people who do accept vouchers, but it's not very long. So just getting that information out there.
Thank you, Jill. All right, group 3.
Well, I guess that was us. I think we're group 3. I don't remember what the question really was, though. What was it? Because we lost our leader.
The question was that Families don't feel comfortable making discrimination complaints to the Fair Housing Office because it's too stressful on them, or they're afraid it will backfire and they won't have a place to live. How do we change the climate in the community for this population?
Okay, we didn't answer that question.
Okay, well, just tell us what you answered. It's still meaningful discussion.
Well, my first question was, and that's why I thought, Christy, you were part of us, but no, was I had gone to, I think Deb Dillenberger or somebody several years ago, asking if the problem was that there weren't enough vouchers or there weren't enough landlords. And at that time, she said there weren't enough vouchers. So one of the things that I think we need to do, because she said at that time we hadn't gotten any new vouchers since 2002.
This is true.
It's now 2020. So, we need to talk with our legislators, our federal legislators, and find out what are they waiting for? Why is the Fox Valley not on the list of new vouchers? This is almost 20 years. And then we also talked about, why reasons that landlords don't want to rent to people because they've been burned and had bad experiences. So how can we maybe get more financial support for case management so that people who are in this situation and really are looking for housing, if we work with landlords to say, hey, I'm there, I'll be there to walk with this person and help him or her with whatever he or she needs to make sure that your apartment is protected and safe, as well as that your tenant is protected and safe. So those are some of the things that we talked about.
Awesome. Thank you, Connie. All right. Well, now we're going to now I'm sure we could talk all night, but we can also go to questions at the end. So I'm going to go back to my presentation, and the slide will come up, I think, magically, because it's super magical. Yes, there it is. Okay. This is Sandy and Fran that I'm talking about in a second. So that's actually the family I'm talking about. And they were fine with sharing their photo and their story, which is kind of cool. Okay. So affordable units are full everywhere, and many unaffordable units are also unavailable. I remember I was at a conference maybe 5 years back, and someone from HUD, U.S. Housing and Urban Development, presented that the trends were showing that higher income people in the Appleton area were renting less expensive apartments, taking up the open market affordable units. So that means like the apartments that were about $500 to $700, those people that were higher income were renting those, leaving less affordable units available for those that actually needed them. So if you did a housing search today, you will find more expensive apartments available, if any of them at all, because the market's really tight. So that means you'd probably find a bunch of not a bunch, but some apartments for $1,100 and up that you could find if you were looking to rent. At the same time, you can't blame people with higher incomes for being thrifty and renting the most affordable apartment, since it's a way for them to stretch their own budgets further. And a total side note, but I just wanted to bring this to your attention. There's a problem that I see that's major for people all the time, and no one talks about it. I'm not sure why, but most landlords require a 60-day notice to vacate an apartment, which is fine. They need to be able to plan their tenancy. But then landlords often won't sign a lease with someone until 30 days before renting. The market's really tight, so that could be why. But that means there's this gap. And so essentially families have to give notice before they secure a new apartment. And then they give notice because their apartment is in horrible condition, they're overcrowded, or they're being discriminated against. So they have like a really good reason on why they need to move. But then giving notice makes them vulnerable, knowing they might not secure a new apartment. So this often creates that emergency and stress on the family that we see as people try to scramble and find a new place within 30 days in a market that doesn't have available apartments, or they become homeless. So it's not for their lack of planning, it's just the system that affects them. I've seen this time and time again with my clients. And then if you add credit issues, being low income, or any other undesirable characteristic, you can pretty much explain why people end up in the homeless shelter. As an example, I worked with a family, San and Fran, that's pictured, that became homeless because they could not find an apartment to rent. They had an average payment history and were, in my opinion, they're the nicest people in the world. But to landlords, they came off annoying since the person, they didn't have the best social skills and her husband wasn't very well groomed. And nothing was illegal about them not getting rented to. They were just the least desirable people in a really competitive market. And so they ended up in a hotel while Habitat was building their house. The good news is during the pandemic, they purchased their house and moved in with Habitat, but they were homeless for about 11 months and living in a hotel room, living in their van. It was not awesome. And they have a adult child with a disability, so they would let her sometimes sleep in the relatives bedroom, and they would sleep in the van in the driveway, and so it was a wreck. So if being undesirable is hard enough, trying being discriminated against for having kids, not being white or other illegal reason, it makes it really hard for people to get ahead. They do a lot of taking one step forward and 3 steps back because they don't have stable housing. They get a good job and then they lose their housing. And then the kids are struggling in school because their world is thrown off because they are living in a hotel room or a shelter or with family and friends. So then the parent gets called at work to deal with the kids and their behavior issues, and then the parent loses their job for missing work. That's what it's like to be marginalized. We find in many programs across the community, if a person has stable housing, it makes it a lot easier to have stability in other parts of their lives. All right. Now, while we are talking about it, there is still quite a lot of discrimination against family with kids. By the way, this is one of the families that luckily hasn't been discriminated against, but they are one of our Habitat families, so put their picture in. But anyway, what happens is either people are not renting to people with kids, or they rent to them, but then they treat them unfairly once they move in. So I am working with a Congolese family right now who rents an apartment in a fourplex in Neenah. And I have to take a drink, sorry. The family has 3 young boys, and anytime the boys go out to play, the neighbor who isn't happy that kids live in his unit calls the cops. Now, the cops are telling the kids they can't play outside at all. I haven't, this just came to me, this came to me about Thursday or Friday, so I haven't been able to talk to the cops yet because of course that's what my next step is, because it could be a simple misunderstanding or lost in translation. But the point is that this family doesn't feel like they can exercise their right to have the kids play outside. Can you imagine living somewhere where you're always worried about someone calling the cops on you for doing nothing wrong? I have another family I'm working with, and they're also Congolese, and their neighbors have a problem with people who aren't white. And this one's in Appleton. So they have called the cops a couple times. The neighbors called the cops a couple times, making things up about the Congolese family doing drugs in the apartment. Now, I know this family well, and they are law-abiding citizens. They even called the police for help, and the police came over, and then they verified that there were no drugs in the apartment. But the landlord didn't care, and they gave the family a written warning stating if they got any more police calls, they would be evicted. Now, the problem is they don't know which neighbor is calling. So there's nobody to complain against to fair housing about, because we're trying to figure this out. But the family is distraught because they know they're innocent, but they don't know how to stand up for their rights. They also fear of going outside because they don't want to bother their neighbors. So then their poor kids don't get to leave the apartment. So it's just heartbreaking. I wanted to talk about, I might have messed up my slide. I think I missed a slide. So we'll just leave it where it is. It's okay. We'll just leave it, but the slide doesn't go with what I'm saying. That's fine though. Other struggles of low-income individuals. Usually low-income families would purchase homes from 4 different programs in the Fox cities. We have Habitat, we have Appleton Housing Authority, Advocap down in like for Neenah Menasha, or Winnebago County Housing Authority for Neenah Menasha. The way that Appleton Housing Authority's program works for the home buyer is that a client finds a bank to approve their loan, and then the housing authority provides down payment assistance. Families on the lower end of the housing authority's income range are getting approved for the loan and for the down payment assistance from the housing authority, but they can't find a home in the community to purchase that is within their price range. For about 2 years, this has been happening, leading to Habitat receiving more applications each round because it's the only affordable home buyer program for those with the lowest income ranges. Unfortunately, Habitat receives so many applications now that we have to decline families due to sheer numbers of qualified people, where in the past we did not have to decline people. The way we do that is we rank everyone that qualifies financially by need for housing, and families with the highest need scores are approved. I do want to point out in Oshkosh, the housing costs are a bit lower. So once in a while, I'll have a client from the Fox Cities who is willing to buy a house down there. But in general, most clients that live in Appleton, Neenah, Menasha, Kaukauna, etc., they prefer to stay where they are and not move to Oshkosh. There are a few reasons why it's difficult to find affordable homes to buy. Low-income homebuyers are competing with the flippers who buy up the affordable homes. The market is extremely hot for homes in that lower price range, which has also driven up the cost of homes, so they're no longer affordable for low-income families. And the affordable ones that are left are in such disrepair they can't pass a home inspection. Another problem affecting low-income families are apartments that are in disrepair and not energy efficient. So that's what, when we're scoring on need for habitat, we might see someone who comes in with an apartment at $500 to $700 per month, awesome, but then we turn around and verify utilities and they're paying $300 to $500 per month in utilities because of drafts in the windows, walls, and doors. And then suddenly the apartment is no longer affordable. People often ask their landlord to fix a broken door or a window or something else substandard in the apartment a couple times, but then when the landlord doesn't fix it, they're afraid to keep complaining or afraid to go to the building inspector for fear of having their lease terminated. A couple of things I want to mention about legal assistance related to landlord-tenant law. Legal action of Wisconsin is great, but in terms of housing, they can only take a case that the person has already received an eviction notice. So any of these issues before that, they cannot take. And this is something you don't really know unless you're working with families. If legal action helped one part of a couple that doesn't live together, because it becomes a conflict of interest to help the other half. So if they help the mom and then the dad lives in a different household and they're both low income, half of the people there can't get served by legal action because of the conflict of interest. So if they help them on another case for something, they can't help the other. That essentially leaves the person to the free legal clinic at the libraries, which is in good times, they can only get them paperwork and point them in the right direction. So better than nothing, but during COVID, when clients are most in need of tenant legal help, the legal clinic is not in operation. The Tenant Resource Center out of Madison has great online resources, but it gets confusing and overwhelming to kind of self-navigate that online. And sometimes clients just need an attorney. I would say if there could be another free legal service, it would be very helpful for the Fox Cities low-income families. So many times they become victims to the tenant landlord law because they do not have an attorney to represent them. And then the legal case like haunts them for years to come, and here they were innocent, you know. I do want to note that there is a private attorney that volunteers time at Levin, which is helpful, but that attorney can't even get close to serving the number of people that need an attorney. Another thing, if you ever hear of someone who is having an issue with building codes, so they don't want to complain while they're there, that's fine. But let them know to schedule the building inspector for the final day that they're in the apartment if they are going to move out. Because the Appleton, I talked to the city a while back, and the Appleton building inspector has to be let in. So they said if the tenant has already secured a new place, then they can feel comfortable letting the building inspector in so that the issues can get fixed before the next tenant moves in. So anyway, that's kind of cool. But otherwise, if they call the building inspector and then they move out, and if the landlord isn't letting a building inspector in, it kind of gets lost because the city can't really do anything and force themselves in, at least most times, unless something became really bad. Another thing that affects housing affordability is a person's criminal background. Housing authorities have rules about recent criminal activity, as do many landlords. If you have a criminal history, you end up renting from anyone that will rent to you, meaning you will either find a substandard rental where the landlord doesn't care about anything, or something very expensive. If you are a registered sex offender, I'm just going to say your best bet is to get a good job and buy a house through the bank, because hardly anyone will rent to you. Many people who are abused as children become abusers as they get older. So they really are a victim to the cycle. With a large number of people who are low income having a history of trauma and sexual abuse, you can see this goes hand in hand for many people. Just a second. Need to take a break.
Thank you.
Yep. Lots of people who are low income also have a history of trauma, as discovered through Project Rush, which looked at characteristics of people who were homeless or on the verge of homelessness. Trauma affects a person in a negative way in many areas of their life. Many times people with histories of trauma will have PTSD or other mental health issues that affect their ability to be successful with many things. But in terms of housing, trouble following through with paying rent on time, completing rental applications, etc. Now you can leave the COVID slide up. We're finally there. I must have missed this slide. Okay. Specific to COVID, lots of my higher earning families, like that I work with through Habitat, work in factories, and many have been impacted by COVID because of supply chain issues where the factory or the department will have to close down for a few weeks until the factory has work for them. These people live paycheck to paycheck, so they don't have the funds to cover living expenses while they wait for unemployment to kick in. And also, as people are testing positive for COVID, some employers are offering short-term disability, some don't. But overall, there's just confusion about the process of applying for the income that they should have while they're at home with COVID. And so this leads to gaps in income and delays. That has made it hard for people to pay their rent, mortgages, or utility bills on time. Again, everyone in the community is probably affected to some extent, but for people living paycheck to paycheck, it has a more devastating impact. Also, most of my families that have two income earners, one of the parents usually quit their job this year to stay home and help their kids with the virtual learning because Appleton's pretty much all virtual. So they already are down one income. So then when they lose part of that income, it's hard on them. Lots of families I work with are single parents, and due to virtual school for their kids because of COVID, they have either had to quit their jobs or switch shifts. So like one parent that I'm working with, she works at a pizza restaurant and she had to switch. She had a 40-hour day job there. She had to switch to a later shift so she could supervise her children with virtual school. The later shift had less hours to offer her, so now her income's down, which makes her struggle financially. The single parents with teens often just leave the little siblings at home with the older ones, which is hard for teenagers to get schoolwork done, but they don't have much choice because the parent has to work and Boys and Girls Club and YMCA is full. Single parents with the young elementary school children, they really need to be there for the kids. So they either have to quit their jobs, or if they were lucky enough to get their kids into the Boys and Girls Club, or I have some third shift single parents I know that they are surviving on 4 hours of sleep, and that cannot be good for their immune system. They work, they sleep for about 4 hours, and then they help their kids with school work during the day. Now, I don't know the statistics on lower income families and having children with disabilities, but all I can say is a lot of families I work with have children with disabilities, specifically learning disabilities, to the point where the child can't be self-sufficient enough to do online school without a parent sitting by their side. Appleton schools, they do have in-person school for kids with severe disabilities during COVID, but a lot of the kids I see fall through the cracks, which means their disability isn't severe enough to be in person, but it is severe enough that they can't be independent at home. Also, many of the parents I work with tell me that they don't have the skill set to help their child with the reading and math work. It's too difficult for the adults. A lot of the case management I've been doing around this is building a support network for the child. So that means setting up extra meeting with the teachers, asking the client if they have like teenage nieces or nephews that can tutor the child. I even set up a few old school pen pals for kids that needed to work on writing by matching them with families from my social network. Another thing that's been difficult for low income refugee families that are non-English speakers is that many do not have experience with technology. For example, my coworker is helping a family whose oldest child is in kindergarten in Appleton. So they don't have an older sibling to help them with like using the iPad. The school sent home an iPad with no instructions on how to turn it on and how to access the work. I'm not bashing the school district. It's just that they had so many students to serve, and I'm guessing it was an oversight, assuming that families knew how to work an iPad. My coworker would go over there for maybe 3 weeks. She would go over there daily to help the family figure out the iPad and worked with the school social worker to get the child situated. Now, eventually the Boys and Girls Club was able to make a spot for this little girl because with the language barrier, it was just too difficult for homeschooling. My coworker also had to help the adult apply for unemployment because he was one of those who worked at a manufacturing that closed down during COVID. And then the client got a new job and he was on a 2-week layoff due to supply chain issues. So she had to help him apply again for unemployment. You can see it just gets messy the more barriers that people have. And it's hard for people. Our community is very lucky to have case managers at a variety of organizations to help these families. All right, next slide. Many community organizations help with housing assistance, including St. Vincent de Paul, Appleton Alliance Church, and Levin. Many low-income people don't have anyone with money to turn to for help, so these nonprofits act as their safety net and have helped many people stay in their homes. I want to touch on Levin in particular. They provide financial assistance to many families in our community. In 2019, they helped 1,453 renters maintain housing, 106 families get current on their mortgages, and 341 families with security deposits. They also assisted 774 homes with utility payments. I talked with Mary Parsons, executive director from Levin, and she said that since COVID-19 came with many government safety net programs, so there are things out there to help families, it doesn't fix everything. There was a stimulus payment, the federal pandemic unemployment, and RAP funding, which helped pay people's rent that was behind due to COVID. She said because of that, she doesn't expect a significant increase in the numbers for 2020, but she said they're anticipating the demand will be higher in 2021 as these COVID programs end, then there will be that need. Levin has been very busy during the pandemic, and they are in need of more volunteers, so I will email the volunteer name if you want to help volunteer there. In the future, though, I think we'll see a housing crisis in our community when the COVID-19 federal moratorium on residential evictions ends, and that's set to end on December 31st. And landlords are then able to remove tenants for being behind on rent. So if you ask me what was the most important thing to work on today, I would say making sure we work on a solution for those thousands of families that are going to be evicted and displaced into a market that has no room for new tenants.
In the middle of winter.
Yep, in the middle of winter. I do want to thank you for listening, and in the future, would love to share more about other marginalized populations since I ate up all my time today. But right now it's time for Q&A, and I saw there was some comments, so we can answer those questions too.
First of all, everybody, we need to thank Christy for her time and her work and the organization she works with. This is phenomenal. So we really appreciate that, Christy. Jean, are you going to handle the chat questions?
Sure. First of all, why are vouchers limited by region or country?
So from what I understand, and Connie can share, they've only always had so many vouchers. And so the only way you can get more vouchers is in around 2011, the 55 HUD VASH vouchers were new. So that was 55 new vouchers because that's when the government released them, but they aren't releasing anymore. The only other way to get more vouchers is if you have someone, they can transfer their voucher in. Like say they moved from Winnebago County to Outagamie County, they can transfer their voucher in, but I just don't think there are more vouchers. Like there just aren't because the government says so. So it's kind of a bad thing.
So I guess the answer to that is that we need to be advocating with our elected officials for that.
Yeah.
All right.
Is that something maybe you'd start with HUD under a new administration?
HUD, comes from HUD, but I don't know who does the budget line because I don't really work in the voucher world, but I don't know who, you know what I mean? Who does them?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
All right.
We can find out.
Next question. And these were related questions. Could we encourage private attorneys to do more pro bono work? What about a program that lets people volunteer to be quasi case managers for people who are renting homes? And are there any federal programs to forgive college loans for attorneys to offer legal services?
If, from what I know about the federal loans to help attorneys, if they work for a nonprofit, yes, there's a forgiveness, but I have never heard of a forgiveness for an attorney that does not work for a nonprofit. So yes, if they do work for like legal action or something, they could get their loans forgiven. Oh my gosh, what the heck were the other questions? I'm sorry.
Could we encourage private attorneys to do more pro bono work?
Oh yeah, I think maybe talking to Levin, if we weren't going to totally start from scratch because they have one attorney, maybe talking to Levin because that's the only other network. Or this, yeah, I think so because I think the legal action clinic, the clinic is only so helpful because you need more than one meeting sometimes, a lot of times. So yeah, I would go with Levin is what I would start that conversation with, and then if it blossoms to something bigger, awesome.
And what about a program that lets people volunteer to be quasi-case managers for people who are renting homes?
Yeah, I think that's neat. I don't know where you chase that, but like Levin, for instance, has a volunteer that's been helping people like find jobs. They were kind of experimenting through a group that I'm in, and that's worked really well. So I don't know where you would like connect them, but Levin, I'm saying Levin, since a lot of people go to help, or Levin, or maybe working with another case manager. The only thing that's a little weird is we tried at Habitat having like someone else take a part of what we were doing, and people really trust that relationship. So it's like, how do you form that relationship in the beginning with the volunteer, because they only like trust the caseworker, or it's just very weird on who they trust. So yeah, but neat idea. See, these are the things you should talk about and do super cool things with.
Okay, and then Rana's got a question. She wants to know where she can get vouchers for kids' winter clothing.
Yeah, Salvation Army is still doing coats for kids, so I would just call them. I would just call them and see if you could hook up. And that's the one in Appleton. For Nina, you could, well, school social workers, some of them have it, but Nina, Wendy Mickelance at, what is that place called? Boys and Girls Brigade. She does the Christmas giving, and they get coats sometimes for them. Yeah, so otherwise, oh, you know what? Salvation Army will do Nina too. So just call Salvation Army. They have a ton of coats. Okay. And then schools have hats and mittens for kids that like show up without them. So I'm sure they still have some in their closets. So try that too.
And Diane Putzer just said, what about the community clothes
Yeah,
closet? And
Diane, what do you know? I don't know a lot. I send people there, but I never ask them what they're getting there. So do you guys know if they have coats? Anybody? I don't know.
I think they do a coats drive every, like winter clothing drive every year, but because wasn't it for the longest time that you could drop coats off at Gunderson and they would deliver them to the community clothes closet? So, I mean, it would be worth a call.
Yeah, there. And then you can also do a referral online for St. Vincent de Paul. Like you refer yourself online now. I haven't tried it yet, but you just go to their webpage. So, I'm sure in the worst case, go to St. Vincent de Paul, but it's kind of nice to have them all like clean and sized over at Salvation Army or Clothes Closet.
All right, it looks like that's all the questions we have in the chats.
So once again, thank you for joining us, Christy. This was really informative, and it generated an awful lot of questions. And so for those of you who are interested, this is being recorded and it will be posted on our League of Women Voter website, probably by midweek. And we thank you for joining us. If you have comments regarding today's program, or if you have program topic suggestions, please email them to us at league.appleton@yahoo.com. Thank you, everybody. I hope you have a good week. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.